at Shasta College, Humanities 2, as we walk our way through the arts that make us who we are. Um, it's Wednesday. It's only 100 degrees today, so it's cool. Uh, Cooler. Hope you guys are staying healthy out there and cool in this heat. Go to the lake. Not on the weekend. It's going to be 4th of July. It's going to be crazy out there. Anyway, a few notes before I get into the meat of the lecture. Um, I hope the things with the journal is clear now. I've posted the sample of the journal, and I think I've explained it. The course is 7 weeks long. You have 7 entries. Each entry is a paragraph or so. In that paragraph, you say what we did that week, what I lectured on, what you saw. If you saw a documentary, what you read in the textbook, and or discussion, and what your reflection on it, what you got out of it. It's plain and simple. You might not think you need the 10 points, but you might need it. Some people don't do it, and then they go from an A to a B really quick. Uh, Also, put it in a file, upload it the last week. It's not due until the last week. It won't even be on there. I can't announce it now because you can't upload. It's not. I'm not ready for it. The course isn't over. And the course has to be over before you can submit it. Okay, so I've done another essay. It's on authors. Um, all of them are 20th century authors. I hope you watch the little documentary on a couple of the early authors like Chekhov. That's where we kind of got our Cervantes. That's kind of where we got our modern fiction from. Believe it or not, from a Russian short story writer, and Cervantes, who wrote hundreds of years before that, in Don Quixote. I posted a couple quick documentaries. I'm going to post a couple more for you to look at to give you as much information as I can about authors and their literary life and how it affects us. And so now you're going to write your paper, right? Essay 2 on one of these authors. I'll talk about each one of them briefly. When you're writing the paper, I haven't read the other papers yet because they all are just due now, and I'll start grading them soon. Just make sure they're at least minimally 3 pages long. You can go as long as you want, but no more than 5, really. But I won't grade you down for more than 5. Also, I gave you an extra 2 days because a lot of you were panicking in your email, not understanding the due dates or the times, getting mixed up AM and PM. Okay, so all assignments are always due at midnight. Yes, that's AM technically, but the Canvas default says 11:59 p.m., which is true, 1 minute before midnight, but it's PM, folks. 11:59 a.m. would be 12 noon, right before 12 noon. So the papers are always due at midnight, Pacific Standard Time. I assume we're all in Shasta County, but sometimes I have people who don't live in the state. So just keep that in mind. And so I gave you 2 extra days. I think the due date is today at 12 midnight. And after today, if they come in late, then you won't get any points. You will get minus some points for being this late because you've had a whole week, 10 days to do the paper. It's plenty. Don't wait till the last minute. I know we do. We have this tendency to do that. And then you hit the panic button and wondering why you're not happy and what can I do to make you happy. All I can say is I give you plenty of time to do these papers, a week. And it's based on your research and maybe a documentary you have to watch, but I don't want any Wikipedia cut and paste jobs. I can spot those 100 miles away. Put them in your own words, your own thoughts, your own analysis, and also put it into the context of the time these people lived. Now, this is all 20th century stuff. In fact, I'm looking at my list. This is really sad. They're all dead. Oh, geez, that's depressing. Joan Didion just died this last year, though. Um, put in context when they were writing. Like, for example, I'll talk about Joan Didion right now. She died. I think she was well into her 80s. She had Parkinson's, and she did a lot of memoirs, which is she's mostly famous for her essays. But she wrote a couple novels also. But her year of magical thinking was uh, a wonderful thing to behold about her dead husband, and her relationship with him. He was a writer, John Gregory Dunn. They were writers together, living in L.A. during the heady '60s, and she was literally hanging out with Jim Morrison and dropping acid and hanging out with the boys at the the Sunset Strip, and as she recorded the history that she was living through, very much of the '60s. But she also did a book. Her books covered each decade, and her White Album book is mostly the '60s and early '70s, and they are essays on her life. She doesn't make up characters. She just says the facts, kind of like a journalist, but a lot more artistic. She has also written fiction books too, Played as It Lays, and a few others, which were actually made into movies. So she could do that also. She had a wonderful way of phrase and a wonderful way of analysis and analyzing the moment. And that's really key to your papers too. Try to analyze the moment when these people wrote their books, when they lived, when you find out they lived there when they were born and when they were of age, when they're in college. That's really important because that infuses their writing. They're writing about the times they're living in, or but at least they're obviously they're influenced by the times they're living. You can't help but being influenced by the times we're living in. That's the times we're living in. So Joan Didion had a very astute way of condensing and thinking and analyzing the times she was living in, and that's why it resonated so much. Um, and that's why her success was profound. Toni Morrison was an African American writer who wrote many books. A couple of them were made into movies. I think Beloved was one that's one of her most famous novels, and she kind of dealt sometimes with magic realism. She went outside the realm of reality. That was part of her culture. That was part of how she was raised, and she handles it in such a way that it's not intrusive or it's not a Harry Potter book. No offense to Harry Potter, but or it's not a Game of Thrones book with flying dragons. That's fantasy. Um, and she was very successful. She died a couple of years ago. Huge loss. She was an icon because she was the first Black American African woman that got such prestigious awards, Pulitzer Prize, etc., and such renowned. And she was a bestseller, which means people were reading her books. And when you look at her, we'll see if I might have a documentary. I'm gonna post some of these, not all of them, because that's too much probably for you guys. But I'll do two, three of them. Post little mini documentaries on them, and then you pick the writer you want to write about. Now, I assume you might not know all these people. I'm assuming you don't know any of them. These people were 20th century writers. Some lived into the 21st century, and they had a profound effect on what Americans were reading. They're on the bestseller list, and that meant they had a large readership. I mean, Kurt Vonnegut was hugely influential with people of my generation. He came out of World War II. Um, he was what they call a post World War II writer. There's quite a few of those. He was one, but he had a way, he wrote some of his greatest books about man's inhumanity to man, but there was always humor in it. And the bitter pill went down easier with his humor, but it also was more savage because it was more human. His most famous books would be Slaughterhouse Five, Cat's Cradle. Maybe you've heard of those books. Slaughterhouse Five was written about his World War II experience and how he came out of that and how it changed him for the rest of his life. Um, he wrote up until the year he died. And he fell down at 86 years old, hit his head. Bad way to go, but he was ready. Just watched a documentary on him, and he was very cynical with life, and he had an awkward love affair with humankind. I understand Kurt Vonnegut very well. My love affair for humankind is, to say the least, awkward. Um, and Kurt Vonnegut had an influence on the '60s hippie generation because even though he wasn't of that generation, he was the Depression era generation. Uh, but he had a way of being very hip and cool and profound. And so the '60s intellectuals in college in the '60s and '70s really embraced Kurt Vonnegut. Would the younger generation, you guys, maybe, I don't know how old you are, but I'm assuming you're Gen X, Gen Z, or millennials, and there might be a couple Gen Xers in there. Um, I wonder if it resonates with your generation. I'm not sure. Um, but he was talking about all the things that the world was going through: the Cold War with Russia, the assassinations of the Kennedys and Martin Luther King, women's movement, civil rights movements. And so his books perhaps referenced those things. He wasn't a political writer, uh, but and for the most part, he made people laugh with their own by showing a mirror up to who they were, who we are. And do we really change? Yes, hairstyles change, clothing styles change, iPhones change, but do we fundamentally change? Just the technology changes, really, if you think about it. John Steinbeck was one of the great American writers. He thrived in the mid 20th century, the 30s and 40s. He wrote, um, maybe you've heard of these books, East of Eden, um, of Mice and Men. I'm forgetting one of his greatest, most famous books. It literally flew out of my mind. I'll come up with it in a minute. The Grapes of Wrath. I'm sorry. She's about the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl of the '30s, poverty, and how a family migrates out to California, the Salinas Valley, in hopes for a better life. Made Most of his movies were made into most of his books were made into movies, and he wrote in a very easily understandable way, and it's very profound. It's not as complicated to read as Faulkner, who wrote in dialect, I should say, um, meaning all his characters are all based in the deep, deep, deep South, and so the words are written as they're sounding coming out of their mouth, and so it makes reading Faulkner a real challenge because the accents are thick. Now, once you get into the cadence of it, you can see the brilliance of it. Um, Faulkner was, you don't have to write about Faulkner, but he was another American writer who was writing the same time as John Steinbeck, the '30s, '40s, the 1920s. Um, he came to Hollywood to make a career out of writing screenplays, and that was a bust. He was a severe alcoholic. He went back to live where he used to live in Mississippi, and continued to write there until he died. Uh, but that's, you never have to write about him. But Steinbeck is in that canon of writers like Hemingway, Jack London, Faulkner. Now, there's not a lot of women in those days writing books. There were some, absolutely. But I've got two women on here, Joan Didion and Toni Morrison. They're a little more contemporary. But there was some wonderful women writers writing in the 20s and 30s, but of course they're never as successful as the men. That's just the way it was. I don't know if it still is. Do you guys read fiction? Who's a great woman writer right now? You tell me. Do you have any? Do you have a favorite besides Rawlings from Harry Potter? Hugely, probably most financially successful writer maybe of all time. Anyway, so J.D. Salinger is another one you can write about. J.D. Salinger was a post World War II writer, meaning he was a veteran. He came out of the war and he wrote very few books. His most famous book is called Catcher in the Rye. It's about Holden Caulfield, a young teenage boy who hates everything. He's rebelling against everything. You don't quite understand what it's all about. But the thing is, we really sometimes we don't know where our anger is coming from when we're 17, or our bitterness or our disappointment. And you hope that, and so he's kind of the poster child for the disgruntled young person coming up in the world. It was hugely influential book, still being read today in high schools, grammar schools. Um, but he also wrote five or six other really profound books, Franny and Zoe, which is some of my favorites, his short stories. And then he became a recluse. Now, he stopped writing, he stopped publishing, I believe, in the early 60s. That was it. And he lived off his very substantial royalties for the rest of his life. And he wasn't interviewed. He said he had no interest in writing anymore. Well, that wasn't true. We found out when he died. I'd have to think of the date when he died, but it's in the last 20 years. Um, they found out he had several novels he'd written, but he said not to be published after my death. Now, as far as I know, they haven't published anything yet. Maybe there's some problems with it, but he's he somehow captured the anxiety of young people in a poetic, profound way. If you read Catcher in the Rye, it's beautiful poetry. The prose are they're wonderful, and it's about a kid who's just trying to find his place in the world. And who isn't trying to do that? You don't have to be a kid to try to be doing that. So it's universal truths, and he hit on it. And then he became a writer who refused to talk to the press or write any more books. You wonder what happened to him, or what he didn't like fame. He didn't like the spotlight on him. He didn't turn the money down though. So those are the people I want you to write about. Look at the times that they lived, how it influenced what they're writing about. Salinger and Vonnegut, World War II writers, they saw a lot of savagery. Um, John Steinbeck was born in another century, but wrote about the beginnings of the expansion to the West. A lot of his books are set in Monterey and Salinas, which is it's just south of here. Um, Toni Morrison, of course, being an African American woman, is influenced by her skin color and her lack of place in the world, and how she had to fight her way to get into that place as a respected author, and she was. She was at Obama's White House. Um, and then Joe Didion, who was this little tiny white woman, chain smoker, who wrote profoundly about who we are from what she saw. Her observations are that deep and profound. So pick one of those writers. Don't just do a Google search. Try to find out who they were, and why they mattered. And even if you have to look at one of their books online and read a couple pages, that wouldn't kill you. You'd really understand them. Read 3 pages in any of their books, and it's going to help your paper. And if you said that in the paper, it will help me give you a better grade. It will look like you actually did some work. The paper's due on Tuesday because it's 4th of July is on Monday. Midnight, folks, p.m. That's a.m., but it's 11:59 p.m. So that's a long way from now. It's still over a week. You have plenty of time. So check out the newest documentaries. I'll find some today, throw them up there. I'll start grading your papers tomorrow when they've all come in. And pay attention to my comments. If I think you did a great job, you won't get that many comments. If I think you need some help, you'll get comments. I think that's it for this section. I'll probably talk to you one more time before the weekend because it's going to be a long weekend, and I won't be speaking to you on Monday because that's the holiday. So until then, and next week, we're going to go into composers' music. We're going to start with Beethoven and Mozart and go to the Beatles and punk rock, the Sex Pistols, and Nirvana, and then we'll do some hip hop also and jazz, Miles Davis and John Coltrane, and some country music. I'm going to try to cram it all in there. The blues is important, and there's a great documentary on the blues that I hope you guys will enjoy and watch. But that's not until next week, so don't worry about it. And your next paper is going to be about a musical person or persons. We'll figure that out. That's next week. Until then, I might have another thing to say tomorrow or Friday, and then you guys have a good weekend. And you know how to get a hold of me with your issues, whatever they may be. And good luck writing. And I just say three things to people: write strong, meaning bring your best game out of the writing. I want to see your passion in that writing. Write honest. Essentially, I don't want any plagiarism. Just do your honest thoughts and analysis. That's what I'm looking for in your own words, not somebody else's. And write the truth. And that's not easy. But I believe you can do it. Until then, see you next time.